Today, we're transforming this space with an affordable, low-profile deck that won't break the bank on Modern Builds. So this is the area behind my house. It's a 16 by 16 square that we're going to be building this deck. And I started by flattening and prepping my build site. There was a little bit of slope from right to left, and so I'm trying to dig out a little bit of soil so that I have a flat base to work with. The plan was to only dig out about an inch from the high side, but I ended up digging out about 2 full inches. Digging out this extra material did complicate the project just a little bit, which you'll see in a second. But right as I was finishing up, I noticed that there were some concrete fence posts stuck into the ground. I used my pickaxe to expose the concrete and then break it away once I realized how deep into the ground this was going. I chipped away at the concrete until it would be sitting a couple of inches beneath the surface of the dirt, and then I grabbed my angle grinder to cut the metal fence post. And what ended up being crazy is there was a second post about 1 foot away. This time I used my sledgehammer to break up the concrete and then once again cut the post with the angle grinder. Whoa! Now it was time to double check that I had made this build site level. So basically what I did is I got a string and a bubble level, and I just made sure that from side to side on each end, it was sloping the tiniest bit away from the house for drainage. There were a couple of low spots that I added a little bit of fill dirt back onto, and then I got my tamper and I compacted all of this dirt down. And this is probably where I should have stopped because I had a sturdy base. I'm very happy with how everything is looking, and I know I'm in the desert, so this probably isn't something I need to worry about, but I'm still gonna put down some landscape fabric underneath our paver base. After rolling it out, I'll just cut it to length and then staple it down with these fabric staples. And after that, we'll start laying down our paver base. I decided to add this paver base for 2 reasons. 1, I wanted to make up that extra inch of dirt that I dug away, and 2, I thought this would give me an even more solid base than the dirt and rocks that we dug out. This assumption ended up being completely wrong though. I was skeptical immediately when I opened up these paver base bags and I saw how brown the material was. In the past, I remember this being super full of rocks and almost gray like cement. I looked back at one of my old paver patio videos and that confirmed it. It was way more gray and rocky. This might just be regional supply difference. Final step of the day, make it rain. I was hoping that this would compact the base down a little bit more, but it didn't. I just wish I skipped this step or maybe used gravel. But now we're moving on to deck framing. One of the unique things about this project is I'm using 2x4s instead of 2x6s or 2x8s for my joists. This is one of the ways we're going to achieve our low profile look. And because 2x4s aren't as beefy as a 2x6, I'm going to be spacing these out 12 inches on center instead of 16 inches, which is what you would do if you had beefier materials for your joists. As you can see, I'm only framing up an 8 foot by 8 foot section at a time. And right here on the edge, I'm putting a double joist. Doing this double joist allows us to inset our footer just a little bit so it's less visible. And in this shot, you can see why I'm framing this up in 8 foot by 8 foot sections. I want a free floating deck that's not attached to the house, and so the only way that I'm gonna be able to build this and move it is if it's in manageable chunks. This second quadrant is gonna have to work around the closet for the water heater. So after I made a couple of measurements and cut my top and bottom plate to length, I started nailing on my studs. And one thing to remember here is there's gonna be a little bit of breathing room between these joists and the house, so the tolerance is quite a bit. I just made sure that my joists kept lining up 12 inches on center so all my fasteners will be even. On the corner of this platform, I'm gonna have to work around a gas inlet going to the house. I'm pretty sure that's for the propane. So after nailing on a little bit of blocking, I grabbed my circular saw and I cut away a little bit of space so that this can slide into place against the wall. In just a little bit, I'll be attaching some blocking to reconnect that 2x4. But first, I kept moving on building these 8 foot by 8 foot platforms. The first couple platforms used full 8 foot joists, but I had to shorten these just a little bit so it lined up with the edge of my house. But the process here is really repeating what I've already shown you. It's just a simple 12 foot on center spacing with a double joist on this outside facing edge. And here you can see what it looks like. Next step, footings. I've got this big box of these little guys. On Amazon, I was able to get 50 of these adjustable plastic leveling footers, and they're only $100 for a 50 pack. That's $2 a piece. And lately, I've been seeing a lot of content creators using these Tough Block foundation blocks. They're obviously way bigger and more heavy duty than the foundation blocks that I got from Amazon, but these cost $13.50 each. And with the low profile design I'm doing with the 2x4 joists, I would need 85 of these. And with tax, that would be over $1,200. But I think if I've got like 85 or 100 of these spread out under the deck, it'll still be super sturdy. So let's find out. I stood and jumped on this thing. It feels pretty sturdy. And I did a 4-foot by 4-foot mock-up deck. And that platform with these blocks felt good on a concrete slab, where these are advertised to be used more often. Yep, I think that'll be it. 4-foot spacing on the footers. But now, I think it's just time to give this a try. Let's do it. The main goal of this video is getting the low profile look at an affordable price. And with doing a 2x4 joist system, you just need too many tough blocks to make it cost effective. Even though each one of these individual footing blocks aren't as heavy duty, so many of them spanned out across this deck really provide a sturdy, stable platform. There's basically 3 tough blocks on every board, on each end and the center. I screwed each of these down with 1 1/4" outdoor rated wood screws, and then used a bunch of 2.5-inch long wood screws to screw my 8-foot by 8-foot platforms together. And finally, I added that blocking I mentioned earlier to reconnect this corner into one piece. And now I need to cut a whole lot of 10.5-inch pieces for the blocking in between my joists. And to make that repeated cut, I don't want to have to measure and mark each one. Instead, I know that the deck of my circular saw is 4 inches from the blade. So I'll get the same speed square I always use to cross cut and a scrap piece of wood, and then I'll line it up right at 6.5 inches and screw that in place so that I end up making a bunch of 10.5-inch 90-degree cross cuts. I've seen quite a few different jigs for making repeated crosscuts on a job site, but this really works. You guys know how much I use this 12-inch speed square, and it was cool finding a new use for it. I added 4 total rows of blocking, and I made sure that they were staggered every other joist. That way I was able to access and end nail this through the joist rather than trying to toe nail each of these blocks in. Oh, and I put the blocking in between the rows of footers. This is feeling way more sturdy with the blocking. The joists are tied together and they're sitting on the same plane better as well. But unfortunately, this paver base just sucks. This is nothing like what I've used before, and I wish I just skipped that step overall. The hard-packed dirt and rock that I pulled out is stronger or a better base than this. Maybe I would have done gravel, if anything. But don't worry, I'm not bummed out. I've already got a solution to this problem. And the answer is cinder blocks. Each of these cinder blocks are 8 inches by 16 inches, which is cool because that means one block can fit under 2 of our plastic footings. What's funny to me though is that these blocks are 2 inches thick, and that's pretty much how much dirt I removed. So if I were to do this project again, I think I would just dig these cinder blocks into the dirt a little bit on the high side of my ground, and I would have been able to avoid a lot of extra digging and all of that paver base nonsense. And it would have saved money. Oh wow, I feel like I can stomp around on this. And the cool part is I haven't even finished out leveling all these blocks. Now I can already tell that the dirt is a little bit high underneath the spine of the deck. So I'm just gonna try and get those paver blocks a little bit lower. And for any fine tuning, I can raise and lower the plastic foundation block. And that will be foundation complete. To make sure that this floating deck never blows away or shifts on me, I'm adding these ground anchors to lock this whole thing down to the earth. It was pretty difficult for my drill to get this stake into the ground, but it was really locked in there once it was in place. I added a couple boards as spacer blocks to make sure that this was all still sitting straight, and after I did my first stake successfully, I added another to each corner. I've also seen people use a cable to connect their deck, but it just made sense for me to use a fastener. It seems like it worked really well. That's not going anywhere. Time for decking. And our next step is giving a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. Building your own website has never been easier thanks to Squarespace's new cutting-edge design tools like Blueprint AI, their AI-enhanced website builder. All you gotta do is tell them a little bit about the website you wanna create, and then they give you a custom template where you can then edit infinitely. And there's other cool features like Squarespace's integrated SEO tools. They do all the back-end work to make sure that you show up more often on search engines, leading to more clients. And with Squarespace Invoices, you can impress those clients with on-brand invoices. And you can streamline your workflow from proposals to contracts to invoices and seamless online payments all in one place. And finally, with Squarespace email campaigns, you've got all the tools you need to engage your clients, promote your services, and build your business built in. So to learn more, make sure and follow my link down in the description. That's squarespace.com/modernbuilds, where you can build out your full Squarespace site before entering any of your credit card info. And then when it's time to make your new site live, don't forget to use my code ModernBuilds for 10% off your first site, store, or domain through Squarespace. As always, huge thanks to Squarespace and you all for watching. Now let's finish up this deck project. Before I install the deck boards, I'm gonna pre-stain everything. In my last episode, I built this DIY deck or fence board staining machine that stains all 4 sides of the board at once. And I was able to do like almost 60 of these boards in about an hour. That's crazy fast. And I was sure to snap a chalk line before nailing in my first board to make sure this was going in straight. And now for the rest of these deck boards, I'm gonna be using this PowerTech screw jig to fasten them down. What's really neat about this thing is it's adjustable. It can clamp around a 3.5-inch board like what I've got, or a full 6-inch deck board. And plus, there's a spacer on the joining edge so that all you have to do is push your board against the previous row and it should stay straight and the spacing should be even. And I was pretty fortunate with this project. I only had a couple of pipes or cutouts to make in my decking. And for this, I used an 1.25-inch spade bit and the jigsaw. I found a few hidden deck fastener jigs around. You can pick them up at Lowe's or Home Depot or Amazon. Just be sure that if you're using 1x4 boards like I am, you get one of these jigs that can adjust down to a small board like this, and it just doesn't work on 5.5 or 6-inch boards. This cutout around the water heater closet is the last that I needed to make for my decking. Before I did too much building, I took the door off the jamb and I shortened it a bit. I'm going to end up making a new threshold so this still stays airtight and watertight. And that's one genuine question I have to any deck builders out there. Sometimes whenever you're against a wall, you really can't get the other side of the screws in. So I wonder what people do in that situation. I decided just to use brad nails, but I wonder if people just use visible screws or if there's some way of using this jig that I was missing. Either way, I just stayed focused and kept putting down board after board. In total, each one of these boards took about 12 minutes to screw in place with this jig. And after a while, it started raining on me unexpectedly. All right, I'm gonna wait for this to slow down. We'll be back. After waiting for about an hour and a half, I could come back to installing my deck boards. And I realized that's one spot where 1x6 or composite decking would make the install a little bit faster because each board takes quite a bit of time to install. But using real wood instead of composite lumber saves a lot of money, and you'll see that in the price breakdown at the end of the video, so stay tuned. And on this shot, I just want to show off how lucky I was with where my boards ended. After installing my next to last row, I could put in my final board and the spacing was perfect where I didn't have to cut around this trim piece on the house. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Big step complete. Before we can call this deck finished, we need to trim the ends of the board to length. So I used some painter's tape to make sure that I didn't get any tear out on my cross cuts. And then I just used my circular saw to follow my chalk line. And a flush trim saw to finish up this cut. In this next shot, you're gonna see me use the offcuts that I just made as spacer blocks for the fascia board I'm gonna put on. My platform base wasn't quite wide enough for the overhang and mat that I wanted, but by adding the spacer blocks on this one end, I was able to make a consistent reveal with the overhang on all my deck boards. And if you ask me, that miter joint is pretty clean. And finally, I added a little bit of stain to the deck boards we just cut, and this project is complete. Now really quick, here's a couple of before shots of the space before we built this back deck, and now let's check out the afters. I am personally really excited about this project. I love the way that it looks, and I can't wait to use the space. I think it's so neat having a deck that you don't have to step high to get onto. And one thing I'm impressed by is just how sturdy this deck feels. Even though it's only 2x4 framing, there's so many support blocks. It just feels super heavy duty. And now let's do the price breakdown I mentioned. As you can see right here, I spent $189 on 2x4s, $630 on 1x4 decking, a little under $200 for our plastic support blocks, and $75 for the cement blocks that went under them. I listed $100 for 2 gallons of stain and another $100 for random screws, nails, and miscellaneous. This all comes out to a total of $12.94. And what I think is so awesome is that's pretty much what I would have spent on tough blocks. Not to mention all the extra costs that would have gone into composite 1x6 decking. That's crazy to think. I built this whole deck for what the tough blocks would have cost. As always, huge thank you guys for watching. Make sure and like, comment, and subscribe down below with that little notification bell. And we'll see you next time on Modern Build.